since a terrorist attack which caused enormous shock throughout a nation.
A plane that lost its tail mid-flight and crashed into several houses in New York. Even a mid-air collision between two planes, creating a global shock and the air catastrophe. These are the 7 plane moments that still haunt pilots today. If you're eating while watching this video, enjoy. Let's start with the first story that every pilot fears will happen to them in their lifetime. A terrorist attack that changed the rules of aviation safety. We're talking about Pan Am Flight 103. It was a cold December night in 1988. At London's Heathrow Airport, a Pan Am Boeing 747 was preparing for a routine flight to New York. Passengers boarding with smiles, crew checking every detail. Everything seemed normal. No one on that plane, nor on the ground, knew that within minutes, the night sky would erupt in one of the most shocking tragedies in aviation history. A thunderous blast, a flash of light, and suddenly silence shattered by the roar of destruction. Homes burning, streets covered in debris, and 270 lives extinguished in an instant. What could bring down a giant of the skies in mere seconds? Who was behind this act? In the next few minutes, we'll uncover the truth. Because this is the story of Pan Am Flight 103. Heathrow Airport, London. Pan Am Flight 103 is preparing for takeoff to New York. As passengers quietly settle into their seats and the crew makes final checks, in the cargo hold a suitcase unlike the rest is carefully placed. Inside, an explosive device set to detonate mid-flight. No one knows. No one imagines. But from this moment, the clock to disaster has already begun ticking. Pan Am Flight 103 cruises smoothly at over 30,000 feet, leaving England's lights behind as it heads across the Atlantic to New York.
Approaching waypoint Sierra November. Roger that. Altitude steady.
In the cockpit, the crew chats, checks instruments, and stays on course. Passengers relax. Some read, others sleep, others simply gaze out the window at the moonlit clouds. But deep in the cargo hold, hidden among the luggage, a bomb waits. Its timer moving relentlessly, counting down the seconds to catastrophe. No one knows it, but every sip of coffee, every laugh, every word is taking place under the shadow of a deadly countdown. One that in minutes will seal the fate of everyone on board. But before continuing, if you like this video, please subscribe. It helps me grow and continue making more videos like this. At 7:03 p.m., a flash shatters the calm of the night. A violent explosion tears the Boeing 747 apart midair. Debris engulfed in flames scatters for miles. Bodies fall from the sky. Burning fragments of the aircraft crash onto rooftops, streets, and fields. In the small town of Lockerbie, Scotland, houses burn, the ground shakes, and chaos takes over. In seconds, Pan Am Flight 103 has ceased to exist. What you are about to hear is the actual cockpit voice recorder from the moment of the accident. Viewer discretion is advised.
I'd like to thank you for flying Pan Am, and to wish you a pleasant flight and a happy holiday. I'll call Patrick and sir. Good evening, Scottish. This is Clipper 103, requesting oceanic clearance.
The roar of the explosion is gone. On the ground, the silence is broken only by distant sirens and cries. Lockerbie has become a battlefield against fire. Houses destroyed, streets covered in twisted metal, and bodies among the debris. Emergency crews work tirelessly, but the magnitude of the tragedy is indescribable. 270 lives lost, including passengers, crew, and townspeople. Amid the devastation, one question grows louder.
Looks like no survivors.
What could destroy an aircraft of this size in mid-air? The investigation is only beginning. And what they will uncover reveals an act of horror planned with precision. The investigation revealed the truth. The explosion was no accident. In the cargo hold, a bomb hidden inside a suitcase had destroyed Pan Am Flight 103 mid-flight. The device had been loaded into checked luggage during its connection at Frankfurt Airport before arriving in London. After years of investigation and international pressure, authorities held Abdelbasit al-Megrahi, a Libyan intelligence agent responsible for the attack. The world was shocked. 270 lives taken in seconds by an act of terror calculated with surgical precision. Today, in Lockerbie, a memorial stands in honor of every victim, and of a flight forever remembered as one of the darkest chapters in aviation history. If you thought that story was terrifying, the next one will leave you breathless. Because one of the worst things that can happen to a pilot is losing the tail of the plane and control in mid-flight. We're talking about American Airlines Flight 587. It was 9 a.m. in New York when a thunderous blast shattered the calm of Bell Harbor, Queens. A fireball fell from the sky, homes in flames, shattered windows, people screaming, running, confused, terrified. A passenger plane had just crashed, right in the middle of a neighborhood. Just 2 months had passed since the 9/11 attacks. The entire city feared the worst. Was it another terrorist strike? A bomb on board? A pilot error? A catastrophic failure? As alarms blared across the state, emergency protocols were activated. But as investigators reached the wreckage, they discovered something no one could understand. The aircraft hadn't exploded in midair, it had lost its tail. This is the story of American Airlines Flight 587, the disaster that shook the world, just as it was beginning to heal. It was Monday, November 12, 2001. American Airlines Flight 587 was preparing to depart from New York's JFK Airport en route to Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. On board, 251 passengers and 9 crew members. Many were Dominican families returning home. Others, simply loved ones on their way back. At the controls, Captain Edward States with over 8,000 hours of experience. By his side, First Officer Sten Moline. The aircraft, an Airbus A300 in service for over 13 years. A routine flight, a calm day. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. At 9:11 a.m., the plane began its takeoff roll on runway 31L. What no one knew was that the next few minutes would change history. At 9:11 a.m., Flight 587 begins its takeoff. Just minutes earlier, a Japan Airlines Boeing 747 had departed from the same runway, leaving behind a powerful, invisible trail of turbulent air. The American Airlines Airbus A300 climbs steadily. Then, it begins to shake. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Sten Moline feels the jolt. He recognizes the signs of wake turbulence, chaotic air left by a much larger aircraft. He responds using the aircraft's rudder, a massive vertical fin that controls side-to-side movement. But his inputs are sharp, aggressive. Rudder left, rudder right, over and over. Within seconds, the plane isn't flying, it's vibrating. The structure strains under pressure. Then, a deafening crack. The vertical stabilizer, the plane's tail, breaks off completely. With no tail, the aircraft becomes uncontrollable. It spirals downward, twisting and breaking apart mid-air. It all happens in just 103 seconds after takeoff. Flight 587 is lost. What you will hear below is the actual black box recording. Discretion is advised.
You all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Hang on to it. Hang on to it. Full power, please. I'm stuck in it. Get out of it.
The plane crashed into Bell Harbor, a quiet neighborhood in Queens. Homes were obliterated, walls collapsed, cars on fire, people trapped under rubble. Thick black smoke covered the streets, roofs littered with twisted metal. The smell of jet fuel and burning debris filled the air. Neighbors screamed. Bodies had landed in their backyards. No one understood what had happened. Many feared this was another attack. Just 2 months after 9/11, the trauma was still raw. Could another plane really have fallen on New York? News outlets went live. The nation held its breath again. But this time, the threat hadn't come from the outside.
The question was immediate. Why did the plane break apart midair? Wreckage revealed something chilling. The aircraft's tail, the vertical stabilizer, had completely separated from the fuselage, and it wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a random structural failure. It was a human reaction taken too far. The flight data recorder showed that after encountering the 747's wake turbulence, First Officer Sten Molen made multiple aggressive rudder inputs, side to side, fast, forceful. Why? He'd been trained to counter turbulence quickly, but what he didn't know was that in the Airbus A300, those rudder movements could generate massive aerodynamic loads when repeated intensely. He was trying to stabilize the aircraft, but in doing so, he sealed its fate. The tail simply couldn't withstand the stress. Airbus, the NTSB, and the FAA spent months running simulations and analyzing training protocols. Their conclusion was devastating. The rudder system allowed extreme inputs, and pilots were never warned how dangerous that could be. It wasn't just a pilot error, it was a system error, a knowledge gap that cost 265 lives. 265 lives were lost that day. Fathers, mothers, children, grandparents, entire families, torn from the sky in just 2 minutes. The Dominican community in New York and Santo Domingo was left heartbroken, and the pain still lingers. In the aftermath, manuals were rewritten, simulators updated, systems revised, but for the loved ones left behind, none of it will ever be enough. Because Flight 587 reminds us of one devastating truth. In aviation, as in life, even the smallest mistakes can lead to unimaginable loss. And when the sky takes someone away, all that remains is silence and memory.
But not all stories are terrifying. Sometimes, despite the tragedies, pilots manage to solve seemingly impossible problems, such as flying a plane without fuel and without the help of its 2 engines. We're talking about Air Canada Flight 143. A Boeing 767 is gliding silently across the skies of Canada, but not because it's supposed to. Both engines have died. No power, no thrust. Just the sound of wind rushing past a 130-ton metal giant falling from 40,000 feet. Inside, 69 souls brace for impact, unaware that below them, a small town is hosting a family race day on an abandoned airfield. That same airfield is now their only chance of survival. But how did this happen? How does a state-of-the-art jet suddenly run out of fuel, mid-air, over one of the safest countries on Earth? In this video, we'll uncover the shocking story of Air Canada Flight 143, an accident that defied logic, rewrote aviation training forever, and proved that even a powerless aircraft can still make history. It's July 23, 1983. Air Canada Flight 143, a brand new Boeing 767, is preparing for takeoff from Montreal, bound for Edmonton with a stop in Ottawa. The aircraft gleams in the summer light. It's one of the most modern jets in the fleet, run by computers instead of old analog gauges. But behind that innovation lurks a hidden problem. Just weeks earlier, Air Canada had begun switching from the imperial system to the metric system. Pounds to kilograms, gallons to liters. And on that morning, the ground crew faced a fuel quantity computer that wasn't working. They had to calculate the fuel manually, a simple conversion. But a single mistake in that math would mean disaster. Instead of loading 22,300 kilograms of fuel, they filled the tanks with 22,300 pounds, less than half of what the aircraft actually needed. Unaware of the critical error, Captain Bob Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal received their clearance. At 12:09 p.m., the engines roared to life, and the sleek Air Canada jet lifted off the runway, climbing confidently into the blue sky. What no one knew was that the clock had just started ticking, because this flight was never going to reach its destination. At first, everything seems perfect. The 767 climbs smoothly, engines humming with the deep, steady rhythm of a flawless flight. The passengers relax. Some read, others chat quietly, and the cabin crew begins service. No one aboard has any reason to believe that above the calm Canadian skies, something is terribly wrong. Captain Pearson and First Officer Quintal talk about the weather ahead. Clear skies all the way to Edmonton. Their instruments show normal readings, fuel gauges steady, nothing out of place. But the reality is, those fuel gauges were showing nothing at all. They had been manually disabled because of the faulty computer system, and neither pilot knew exactly how much fuel they really had. 20 minutes into the flight, everything still feels routine. The jet cruises effortlessly at 39,000 feet. Passengers sip coffee, unaware that below the wings, the last gallons of fuel are being consumed far faster than expected. Then, a small sign, barely noticeable. The first low-pressure fuel warning light flickers on for the left engine. Just a glitch, they think. Moments later, the same light flashes on the right side. Now, both pilots exchange a look. This shouldn't happen. Both engines showing fuel pressure warnings? They cross-check systems. The indicators seem normal. The flight continues. But as the aircraft passes over Red Lake, Ontario, a chime sounds again. Then, suddenly, silence. The left engine dies. The cockpit fills with the sound of alarms, warning tones echoing in rapid bursts. Pearson immediately takes control while Quintal tries to restart the engine. The plane begins to descend slightly, its massive frame trembling against the air. Still, there's hope. They can glide, restart, fix this. But before they can even attempt a restart, another sound cuts through the cockpit. A deep, hollow whine, followed by another deafening silence. The second engine has failed. Both pilots stare at each other. They're now flying a 130-ton glider with 69 lives aboard, and the nearest airport, hundreds of kilometers away. The silence inside the cockpit is terrifying. Every light on the panel is flashing red, warning of systems that no longer exist. The engines are dead, both of them. And with that, so are the generators, the hydraulics, and the fuel pumps. The Boeing 767 is now a powerless metal glider slicing through thin air at 35,000 feet. Captain Pearson grips the yoke, fighting the heavy control forces. Without engines, the aircraft's hydraulics can't assist his movements. Every turn, every pitch adjustment requires raw strength. He's literally wrestling the airplane to keep it level. Meanwhile, First Officer Quintal frantically flips switches. The emergency checklist, the restart procedure, the auxiliary power system. Nothing. Every attempt fails. The engines refuse to come back to life. Then, something even more alarming. The cockpit goes dark. The main power is gone. Only one small device powered by wind, the RAT, the ram air turbine, unfolds beneath the aircraft, generating just enough energy to keep the most vital instruments alive. "Let's think," Pearson says, steady but focused. He begins calculating glide distance, how far they can travel without power. For every 1,000 feet of altitude, they can glide about 2 miles. At 35,000 feet, that's roughly 70 miles of range. It sounds like a lot, until you realize there's no airport within that distance. Quintal scans the chart. The nearest major airport is Winnipeg, and they're too far. They'll never make it. But then he remembers something. A small airfield, one he used years ago in the Air Force. Gimli, a former RCAF base. Maybe, just maybe, they can make it there. The only problem? It's been decommissioned for years. No control tower, no emergency services. No one expects a 767 to fall out of the sky. Still, Pearson makes the call. "We're going to Gimli." And as the powerless jet banks toward its only hope, the passengers inside still believe the pilots have it under control. They have no idea that they're gliding toward an airstrip that no longer exists. As Air Canada 143 descends toward Gimli, the pilots finally get a clear look at the runway, and their hearts drop. The old airbase isn't empty. It's crowded. Families, cyclists, and spectators are all over the pavement because the runway has been converted into a public racetrack. And today it's in full use. Pearson has only seconds to react. There's no time to abort, no power to climb, and no alternative below them except trees and metal barriers. The aircraft sinks, fast, too fast. Without engines, Pearson performs a side slip, a risky maneuver meant to kill speed, but one almost never attempted in a giant jetliner. The plane drifts sideways, the wings shaking violently as if they might snap. People on the ground look up, stunned, realizing a massive Boeing 767 is about to land right on top of them. The landing gear crashes down. One of the struts locks improperly. Sparks fly as the nose begins to drop. The plane skids, sliding uncontrollably toward a group of spectators. Pearson holds the controls tight, fighting to keep the jet straight as the aircraft screeches across the tarmac, leaving a trail of smoke, rubber, and sheer terror in its path. When the aircraft finally grinds to a stop, the cabin fills with stunned silence. Passengers look around in disbelief. Alive, shaken, but alive. Outside, spectators run toward the plane, unsure whether they've just witnessed a miracle or a catastrophe. The nose sits collapsed on the runway, smoke drifting into the cold air. But the jet is intact. Against every odd, the crew has pulled off one of the most extraordinary landings in aviation history, later known worldwide as the Gimli Glider. But sometimes, not all accidents have a happy ending, as some even change the history of aviation. One of the things pilots fear most is flying and not knowing where they are going, because accidents like the one you will see below, the story of the Grand Canyon mid-air collision, could happen. It's June 30th, 1956. Two airliners slice through the bright Arizona sky. TWA Flight 2, a Lockheed Super Constellation, and United Airlines Flight 718, a DC-7. Both have just departed Los Angeles, heading east on similar routes. It's a beautiful summer morning, the kind of calm that makes flying feel effortless. But above the vast Grand Canyon, that calm is about to shatter forever. At 10:31 a.m., passengers aboard both aircraft are gazing out their windows at the breathtaking scenery. Red cliffs, deep canyons, sunlight reflecting off the Colorado River. Then, in an instant, two silver streaks cross paths. A blinding flash, followed by silence. The two airliners collide head-on, ripping apart in mid-air. Debris rains down into the canyon below, scattering across the rock formations. All 128 people on board both planes are killed instantly. It becomes the deadliest air disaster in U.S. history at that time. But what really happened? In 1956, America's air traffic control system was primitive. Once planes left controlled airspace near airports, they entered what pilots called see and be seen territory, relying only on visual contact to avoid each other. There was no radar coverage, no real-time tracking, and minimal communication once aircraft reached cruising altitude. Both pilots had requested altitude changes to avoid storm clouds, unknowingly putting themselves on a collision course. When they emerged from the clouds, it was too late. The investigation exposed the truth. The skies were no longer safe under outdated rules. The public outrage was enormous. Families demanded answers, and the tragedy forced Congress to act. In 1958, just 2 years later, the U.S. government created the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and the National Airspace System, introducing radar coverage and controlled airways across the nation. This catastrophe in the Grand Canyon marked the end of uncontrolled skies and the birth of modern air traffic safety.
If you think this story was terrifying, there are other situations that terrify pilots, such as catastrophic landings, accidents that still happen today, like the one that befell Emirates Flight 521.
An explosion rocks Dubai Airport, a black cloud rises, and a Boeing 777 is engulfed in flames. Passengers run along the runway, some carrying suitcases, others searching for their children. What exactly happened? Was it a mechanical failure? Human error? What seemed like a routine landing was seconds away from turning into a total tragedy. This is the true story of Emirates Flight 521. Are you ready? Let's get started. August 3rd, 2016. Emirates Flight 521 takes off from southern India bound for Dubai. On board, 282 passengers of 20 nationalities and 18 fully trained crew members. The aircraft, a Boeing 777-300, over 12 years in service, maintained to the last detail. In the cockpit, 2 experienced pilots, a captain with over 7,000 flight hours, and an Australian first officer with 3,000 hours. Everything seemed normal until they approached Dubai. As Flight 521 approached Dubai, the atmosphere was stifling. The thermometer read 48 degrees Celsius. Extreme heat, invisible but dangerous. Why? Because hot air is less dense, and when the air is less dense, the engines produce less thrust, the wings generate less lift, and the runways simply become shorter. At that moment, the Boeing 777 needed more runway, more power, and more margin for error. But it wouldn't have it. From the tower, a new risk was already being warned: wind shear. Unpredictable gusts of air can push or slow an aircraft at the most critical moment, landing. Despite everything, the flight was cleared to land on runway 12, and so began a chain of seconds that would change the history of Emirates Flight 521 forever. 2:37 p.m. Dubai time, Emirates Flight 521 lines up with runway 12. The plane is approaching at over 300 kilometers per hour. It touches down, but not at the right spot. Instead of touching down at the start of the runway, it touches down 1,100 meters later, almost halfway down. This is what's known as a long landing. It means the plane has used up part of the runway without touching the ground. The problem? Now there's much less room to brake, and the plane isn't decelerating enough. Then an alert goes off in the cockpit: long landing. The captain reacts immediately and decides what in aviation is called a go-around, an emergency procedure where the landing is aborted to go around and try again. But here's the big problem. For the go-around to work properly, the engines must automatically increase power. However, what few people know is that if a plane has already touched down, even if it's just the rear wheels, the automatic go-around system is deactivated. This is what happened on Flight 521. The rear gear had touched the runway. The engines were still idling. The plane tried to get back into the air, but without power. The pilots raised the nose. They retracted the landing gear, but the engines didn't respond as they expected. For an instant, the Boeing 777 rose barely 25 meters, the height of a 7-story building. 12 seconds later, without speed, without lift, the plane plummeted onto the runway. The rear end hit first. The landing gear was partially retracted. The impact was brutal. The fuselage twisted, the right wing broke, and the fire had already started. The plane skids, it twists, the fuselage fills with smoke. But the crew acts quickly. In less than 90 seconds, all passengers are evacuated. All except 2, the captain and a flight attendant checking the plane for the last time. But it wasn't all heroic. Several passengers halted the evacuation to retrieve suitcases, an action that could have cost lives and generated a wave of worldwide criticism. 9 minutes later, a second explosion. The fire reached the central fuel tank. The aircraft exploded. A firefighter, Jassim Al-Balushi, 27, died while trying to extinguish the fire. He was the only fatality in the accident, a hero who came in just as everyone else was leaving. The official investigation concluded it wasn't a technical failure. It was a combination of poor judgment and overconfidence in the automation. The pilots didn't notice that the auto throttle didn't activate, and when they did, it was too late. They were trained in simulators, yes, but never for a situation like this, with the plane already touching down. A mistake of seconds, with consequences that lasted for years. Emirates Flight 521 became a global case study, not because of the destruction, but because of what was prevented. 300 people survived. One man lost his life to save others, and the lesson remains, in aviation, a split second changes everything. Fly safe, stay curious.
If you think a bad landing is one of the things pilots fear most, that's one of several problems, because next, you'll see how a forced landing due to lack of fuel can create a national commotion. We're talking about United Airlines Flight 173. United Airlines Flight 173 was nearing Portland on a cold December evening in 1978. Passengers relaxed as the aircraft began its descent, expecting to land within minutes. But just as the crew extended the landing gear, something felt wrong. A loud thud echoed through the cabin, followed by unusual vibration. The landing gear light, the small, simple confirmation that the gear had locked, did not illuminate. The crew suddenly had a potential gear failure, and tensions spread through the cockpit. Instead of continuing the approach, the captain entered a holding pattern to diagnose the issue. The passengers felt the aircraft circling over the dark suburbs of Portland, unaware of the growing stress behind the cockpit door. The crew lowered the gear again, checked circuit breakers, and tried visual confirmation, but the indicator stayed dark. Every minute that passed increased the uncertainty. The aircraft circled, engines humming steadily, while the pilots focused entirely on the landing gear problem. But as they concentrated on this single issue, a far deadlier problem crept in unnoticed. The aircraft had been in the air far longer than planned. Fuel continued to burn, dropping lower and lower. A flight engineer repeatedly mentioned the decreasing levels, but the captain, fixated on the landing gear, believed they still had time. Outside the windows, the city lights shimmered beneath them, unaware of the emergency unfolding above. Then came the moment of truth. One by one, the engines began to flame out. First one, then another. The cockpit filled with warnings. The crew realized the horrifying truth. They were out of fuel. With almost no thrust left, the aircraft descended rapidly. The passengers felt the terrifying silence of engines winding down. The ground rose quickly in the darkness as the pilots tried desperately to reach the airport. But they didn't make it. United Flight 173 crashed into a wooded suburban neighborhood just miles from the runway. Houses shook from the impact. Emergency crews raced to the scene as flames consumed parts of the aircraft. Many passengers survived thanks to the crew's attempt to soften the descent, but several lives were lost, and the tragedy shocked the nation. Investigators later concluded that the root cause was not mechanical failure. It was human factors. The landing gear had actually deployed correctly. The indicator bulb was simply burned out. Instead of balancing tasks and monitoring fuel, the captain became entirely absorbed in troubleshooting. This accident exposed the profound dangers of fixation on a single issue while ignoring the overall situation. The aviation industry responded with one of the most important reforms in history: crew resource management. Pilots were retrained to communicate clearly, challenge decisions when necessary, and share responsibility in the cockpit. United 173 became the case that forever changed cockpit culture, ensuring that no pilot ever flies alone in their decision-making again. And to finish, we want to share one of the fears pilots have when flying: that part of the plane will separate mid-flight, endangering everyone on board. We're talking about the story of Aloha Airlines Flight 243. On April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 took off from Hilo Airport on what everyone expected to be a routine island hop. The Boeing 737 climbed smoothly into the warm Hawaiian morning. Until, at 24,000 feet, something unthinkable happened. With a deafening explosion, the entire upper section of the fuselage, from just behind the cockpit all the way to the wings, suddenly tore away. The force of the decompression ripped open the airplane like a giant zipper. Passengers found themselves staring directly at the sky, wind blasting through the cabin at hurricane speeds. Miraculously, the pilots were still alive, barely able to hear, barely able to breathe, and fighting to keep the aircraft stable as it shook violently. The plane had essentially become a convertible at cruising altitude, yet they continued descending, determined to save the lives on board. Despite the torn structure and chaotic airflow, the crew managed to line up with Kahului Airport. The landing gear hit hard, but the aircraft stayed intact. Against all odds, Flight 243 slammed onto the runway and skidded to a stop. Out of 95 people, 94 survived. What happened in the sky was nearly impossible, yet they made it down. Investigators quickly discovered the shocking truth. The aircraft's skin had been weakening for years due to a combination of heavy use, salt-rich island air, and poor inspection practices. The metal panels that formed the fuselage had tiny cracks, so small they were almost invisible. But on a plane that flew short routes multiple times a day, the constant cycles of pressurizing and depressurizing made those cracks grow. This process, known as metal fatigue, slowly eroded the integrity of the fuselage. Eventually, three critical factors aligned: high flight cycles, corrosion from the island environment, a missed detection of the growing cracks. Together, they caused the upper section of the aircraft to fail explosively. Flight 243 instantly became one of the most important safety cases in aviation history, leading to stricter inspection rules worldwide. Aloha Airlines Flight 243 remains a reminder of how even a small crack can become a massive threat, and how pilot skill can turn a near-certain tragedy into a miracle landing. Thanks for watching this story. If you enjoy these detailed aviation breakdowns, consider subscribing. Your support helps keep these investigations coming. I'll see you in the next video.